Joy to be with you. I've been to this church a few times now, and I'm very happily ensconced in my own church, but if I needed to come to another church, I'd come to this one. So of all the churches I don't go to, this one is my favorite. So you're very welcome. That's high praise. It's a privilege to be here for the beginning of this series. I'm glad you're having these opportunities to think through questions, and this question today is one that frequently comes up. I was at a gathering a few years ago. We had sort of various family friends all together and extended family and all that kind of thing. And I was with lots of people I hadn't seen for about 10 or 15 years. And so there was all the kind of the usual questions people ask when they haven't seen you for that length of time, which is, what do you do? What are you up to? So I would tell them that, I'm a church pastor, which then begs the next question. So what do you do? That's what you are, but what do you do? So I was trying to think through how to answer that question, and there's a kind of an acceptable way of answering that question and a slightly unacceptable way. The acceptable way is to say that, I try to help Christians grow in their faith and help other people consider the relevance of the Christian faith to their everyday life. That's all true and glorious, and I love getting to do that. But the other way of putting it is, actually, I'm trying to convert people to Christianity. That's a slightly less acceptable way of phrasing it. It may not be the best language that we could use. But I was talking to one particular family friend who was trying to say, I hope you don't talk to people of other religions. And I said, well, sometimes I do. And she said, I hope you don't try to convert them. And it raises this question of how should we think about the fact that we live in a world with lots of different beliefs, lots of different religions, lots of different understandings of spirituality. And it's a significant question because we live in a very pluralistic context here in Nashville. We feel that to be the case. We don't want to be people who are causing offense to others. We're also just aware of the need not to kind of inflame things. We're in a very sort of volatile context. We don't want to sort of cause any kind of, triggering kind of any aggression or that kind of thing. So it's a kind of a tricky issue for many of us to think about. So what I want to do is to give you the answer that many people in our culture would give to this question. I'm then going to attempt to give you the answer I think Jesus gives us to that question. And then as we close, just to encourage you to think about what your answer might be to this question of are all religions the same? So here's where I think many people in our culture today would answer this question. Aren't all religions the same? Many people would just instinctively say yes. Many of our friends who might be more secular, who might not be professing any particular religious belief, would probably say, yeah, all religions are basically the same. The reason for that is people would want to say all religions are equal, not just in terms of their right to practice and their freedoms and legal status and that kind of stuff, but a lot of people would want to say they're all equally true. And here's why a lot of people think that way. Just to imagine, this is a random thought experiment, but I'm sure it will be a Apple Plus show at some point. Just imagine we all ended up in a room that had no windows, no doors. We'd had our memories wiped, so we had no memory of anything from before being in this room, and we're sealed in it. And we kind of realize that we're in this room together. The questions start coming of where did we come from? How did we get here? Is there anything outside this room? And we'd all have our own ideas and thoughts and intuitions and all the rest of it. But ultimately, unless we could get outside of the room, we wouldn't know the answer. And so a lot of people would say, well, today we're trapped inside this box called space and time. We can't ultimately know if there's anything outside of it. And so that's fundamentally unknowable. We can know about the stuff in space and time. We can use science, we can use other disciplines, but we can't really know if there's anything beyond this material existence that we experience. And therefore, all opinions are equally valid. All opinions are, in one sense, equally true, which is another way of saying they're all equally untrue as well, but they're all equal, and we can't ultimately know. Now, some people would go a step further and not just say that all religions are kind of equally unverifiable in that way, but that all religions are actually the same. There's a school of thought that says, you've got these different religious beliefs, different kind of practices, but they all lead to the same place. They're all different paths up the same mountain. That's an illustration that's commonly used. You look at these different religions and you observe a number of similarities. All of them maintain that there's a kind of spiritual dimension to life, that we're not just physical beings. All of them advocate some kind of prayer or reflection or contemplation. All of them have some version of, be good to other people and do nice things to your neighbor as you'd want them to do for you. All of them seem to go in for having large buildings that are difficult to heat for their kind of main gatherings. And so it's easy to think, well, they're all basically the same product with just different packaging. They're all basically tapping into the same spiritual reality. They all lead to the same place. They all lead to God. They all lead up the same mountain. And that can feel really intuitive for a lot of people. It feels tolerant because you're kind of giving each its own credit. But I want to suggest there are some problems with that way of thinking. Two in particular. The first is the problem of contradictions. It is very hard to maintain that all religions are the same when they make diametrically opposed claims. So you think about just the question of, is there such a thing as a God? Different religions have wildly different answers to that. I did a degree in comparative religion, but that was about 1,000 years ago, and so my memory is hazy, and some of these things may have moved on since then. But my understanding is that Sikhism believes there's only one God. Hinduism believes there are actually millions of deities. Buddhism is, strictly speaking, atheistic. So just on the question of, is there such a thing as a God, there are different answers. They can't all be true. Or bringing it a bit more close to home for those of us who are Christians, we believe as Christians that Jesus is the Son of God, that he was crucified, died, and bodily rose again. Now, my Jewish friends believe that Jesus was crucified. They don't believe he was the Son of God, and therefore don't believe that he rose again. My Muslim friends believe Jesus was a prophet, but he wasn't, and he was a special and uniquely revered prophet, but he wasn't more than that. He certainly wasn't the Son of God, and they believe he wasn't crucified. He didn't really die. God would never have let him experience that kind of dishonor. Now, here's the thing. They can't all be right. They could all be wrong, but they can't all be right. And it won't do to say, well, we can never have certainty about things that are religious because we're talking about whether a person died and rose again or not. This is inside the room, inside the box of space-time, things that we're talking about. This is in the realm of being testable. And it's not peripheral either. It's not incidental to the Christian faith whether or not Jesus died, whether or not he rose again. It's central to what we believe. So it's very hard to pretend that all religions are really saying the same thing. When I was a teenager and finished high school, I took a gap year. That was what we did back then. This was the 90s. We had to go and find ourselves, and that meant going somewhere else. And so me and a group of friends went to Kenya. And we worked at an orphanage for a few months, did some traveling around, and then went off and went to college. But I remember when we arrived at this orphanage, there were 100 or so kids there. There were 5 of us who had gone. And in those early days, the kids kept mistaking us for one another, and we kept mistaking them for one another. And one of the kids said to us at one point, well, you all look the same. And we were like, well, no, we don't. But you do, you all look the same. But as we all got to know each other, by the end of the trip, we all knew each other well. We knew each other's names, we could tell each other apart. No, by the end of the trip, none of us felt the others looked the same. And so when someone says to me, oh yeah, all religions are the same, what it really tells me is they don't really know any religions. It might sound tolerant. I want to suggest it's actually lazy. Because you hang out with enough, in my case, Kenyan orphans, you realize how different they are. And if you hang out with different religions, you realize how different they are. Here's the other issue, though, and that's the issue of arrogance. I've had people say to me, and I understand this, that they think it's arrogant that I think what I believe is true. But I want to suggest to believe that all religions are the same is even more arrogant. Because by saying that, you're claiming to know more about each of those religions than its own adherents do. You're basically saying to Muslims and Hindus and Buddhists and Sikh, yeah, I know what you think you believe, but I actually know that you're all really ultimately believing the same thing. I've got greater insight than all of you. And the only way you can know that each religion is a different path up the same mountain isn't because you're on the same mountain, it's because you're up in space looking down on the mountain. You're claiming to have that kind of omniscience of what's really going on. So I want to suggest it's not actually tolerance to tell people what it is they actually believe, whether they agree with you or not. That's tyranny. It's not allowing each religion the dignity of articulating on its own terms what they really believe. So that is the answer of many people today. All religions are just the same. I don't think that is tenable. I don't even think it's respectful. But I want to spend a few moments sharing what I believe Jesus' answer to this question is. And I'm a Christian, so of course I'm going to go to Jesus to see what he has to say. But he makes some claims. I'm going to read a few verses from the Gospel of John. Jesus makes some claims that I hope will give all of us something to think about as we engage in this question. I'm going to read a few verses from John chapter 14. John is one of the accounts of Jesus' life. And in this part of the gospel, Jesus is about to be crucified. And so he's kind of saying some final things to his disciples. He knows what's about to happen. This is his kind of final words. And final words are often significant words. You've thought through what you want someone to know. It's not always the case. Don't know if this is true or not, but Oscar Wilde, if you're familiar with him, his last words apparently were, "This wallpaper is dreadful, one of us has to go." One of them did. Nancy Astor, I've got no idea who she is, but apparently her last words, she could see all her children were gathered around her bed, and she said, "Am I dying or is it my birthday?" General John Sedgwick famously said, these were his last words, this is, I presume, on the battlefield, he said, "They couldn't hit an elephant at that dist." Well, these are Jesus' last words, and they could not be more serious because Jesus is trying to help his disciples understand that what he's about to do through his death and resurrection is to go outside the box of space and time and to prepare a way for us to do the same. So listen to these words. Jesus says, "Let not your hearts be troubled. Believe in God. Believe also in me. In my Father's house are many rooms. If it were not so, would I have told you that I go to prepare a place for you? And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and take you to myself, that where I am, you may be also. And you know the way to where I am going." So that's what Jesus is claiming. He's actually, through his death and resurrection, preparing a long-term spiritual home for us where we can be with him. Well, that raises lots of questions. So he's just said, "You know the way to where I'm going." Thomas, one of the disciples, said to him, "Lord, we don't know where you are going." Thomas is honest. I love that. He's like, "I'm not following you at all. I have no idea what you're talking about. Okay, is this on Google Maps? Can you airdrop me the address? Well, I don't know where you're going, so I don't know how to get there with you. I don't know the way." To which Jesus then says in verse 6, "I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me." So Jesus says he is the way. In other words, the only way we can have a right relationship with the God who made us is through his death and resurrection. He is charting a way for us to go through him, through his death, through his resurrection. And it gets to the heart of what is unique about the Christian faith. Someone once put it this way: Christianity is not a two-letter religion, D-O. Every other belief system I've ever looked at closely and come across tells you to do something. You've got to try harder, you've got to be better, you've got to pedal faster. There's laws, there's ritual, there's karma, there's things you have to do to merit, earn, or attain whatever ultimate spiritual reality we're designed for. Jesus is claiming that actually what he's about is not D-O, but D-O-N-E. That all that we need, he is doing for us in his death and resurrection. Whatever we need, he is accomplishing on our behalf. We can't get ourselves to where we need to be. He has to take us there and do it all for us. He continues in the next verse. He says, if you had known me, you would have known my Father also. From now on, you do know him and have seen him. So Jesus says he's the way. He also says he's the truth. He is how we know what spiritual reality is. Now, my parents are still alive. They're back in England. They've been able to come over and visit. Able to have a meal with Jim and Kim, which was great fun. And over the years, whenever my parents have visited me, wherever I've been, I'll often just give people a heads up and say, listen, my dad is me, but with grey hair. You'll instantly spot him. He's just, imagine me, but with grey hair. Now that I have grey hair, I need another way of kind of distinguishing between me and my dad. But the fact is, we do become, however much we resist the idea, we do become a bit like our parents. I've noticed ways in which, and this would have been just a tragedy to the teenage me, but I can think of ways in which my humor is now like my dad's humor. When my brother was a teenager, he insisted that my parents not walk, if we were out shopping or something, they had to walk a certain number of paces ahead so that he had enough distance to provide a bit of deniability. But the fact is we look like our parents. And we start to act like our parents. I'm not yet planning to wear socks and sandals, but I presume that is going to be in my future. Well, Jesus is saying that he is the Son of the Eternal Father, the eternal Son of the Eternal Father, and he is saying that their relationship is so close that everything the Son does is a perfect reflection of the Father. To my dad's relief, there are still differences between us. You can tell us apart. I think that's good news for him. But Jesus is saying he is so exactly like the Father that to see him is to see the Father. So it's as though Jesus' end of that father-son relationship has swung down into space-time, into history, so that we can actually know what God is like by looking at him. We can know what spiritual reality ultimately is by looking at Jesus. And so I guess my challenge for us, if there may be a number of us in the room this morning who are not Christians, is why don't you read one of the gospel accounts and just look at what Jesus does and says and ask yourself the question, firstly, could anyone who isn't God be like this? And then secondly, if there was a God, wouldn't I want him to be like this? Jesus says he's the way, he says he's the truth, he says he's the life. In other words, he is what real life is about. Whenever there's like a power outage, I'm always immediately kind of conscious of how much battery is on each of my devices and how long each of them has got left. And there's a sense in which, by nature, we are men and women who have been spiritually unplugged from the source. And so the life we have is a kind of a life that is draining and is not plugged into the source. And Jesus is claiming to be the one who can reconnect us with our spiritual source and therefore give us real life, a kind of life we don't naturally know about on our own. And Jesus claims that he is exclusively the way to all these things. He alone is the way, the truth, and the life. Now, again, that may sound to many people today offensive or troubling. And that's understandable. But the question is, what if it's true? Which is why I want to close by just asking you to consider what your answer is to this question. Aren't all religions the same? Jesus is making some bold claims here. What do you do with claims like that? Well, just imagine, this is a slightly absurd thought experiment as well, but just imagine I told you that I have hidden some money in 3 nearby restaurants. Okay, Chick-fil-A, Chipotle, Five Guys. For sake of argument, I've gone to each of whichever the nearest ones of those are, and I've hidden a sum of money in each. I've hidden $10 in Chick-fil-A, I've hidden $100 in Chipotle, and I've hidden $1 million in Five Guys. Where would you start looking? I'm not going to do that, obviously. But you would start looking at the possibility that has the most to offer. And I want to suggest, if I may, that Christianity makes the biggest claims here. And so if all other things are equal, why don't you start looking there? Because Jesus is offering himself as the way, the truth, and the life, and to be that in a way that nowhere else can offer that. So may I suggest, if you haven't done this yet, find a copy of one of the Gospels of accounts of Jesus' life. There may be some even around here that someone can give you. They're all online as well. And just examine. There's some over there. There we go. I'm just giving away this church's resources to you, so that's great. Pastor Jim will just pay for any that you need, and happy to do it. But think to yourself about who this man Jesus Christ is. Could it be the case that he is the way, the truth, and the life? I'd recommend you start there, but for the sake of integrity, start somewhere and consider your own answer to this question. Let me pray for us, and I'll hand over. Our Father, we thank you for this opportunity to be together over lunch. We thank you for giving us the opportunity of considering this question, and I pray that you would help each one of us to find clarity in the answer to this question. Father, I pray that there might be people today who come to find in Jesus the way, the truth, and the life.